Disappointment pierced me through. Still I kept on loving you. That lyric from the final verse of Just as Long as I Have Breath may be my favorite line of any UU hymn. Now, is it my favorite line because it gives me a nice, clear message of what I should do in the world? No, it is not. It does not give me a clear message. That line is so messy. It leaves me wrestling with the meaning that I'm supposed to take away from it. Is it a message that I even like? Something I want to carry with me? Or is it something that I want to push away, reject? Should I sing my heart out? Or should I never choose that hymn for worship again? Blessed ambiguity. Maybe that should be the UU slogan. It is what I love about that line. There is meaning there. In fact, there are lots of possible meanings. The lawyer in me says, of course, that's what ambiguous means, Chad. I have to think about it, wrestle with it, figure out what I think it means to love someone who has pierced my being with disappointment. What kind of disappointment are we talking about here? Like, forgot to pick up the dry cleaning disappointment? Forgot my birthday disappointment, which actually in my case wouldn't be that huge a deal. Broke my heart disappointment. Hurt someone. Killed someone disappointment. Does it matter what kind of disappointment we're talking about? I mean, if the disappointment is great enough, if it pierces enough, then do I stop loving? And where's that line? And who even is the you that disappointed me? Who am I singing this to? But I say to you who are listening, love your enemies. That Jesus, he was pretty good with the blessed ambiguity too. Oh, no, I know this short message sounds simple and clear. Love your enemies. There we go. We're done. Good to go. Might as well jump to the closing hymn. Hold on. Because the more we think about it, the more we have to think about it. This message from Jesus in that sermon. It is, says the theologian Warren Carter, a command in search of elaboration. Dialogue, discernment. It provides direction, but it leaves the itinerary to the traveler. Leaves the itinerary to the traveler. Well, fellow travelers, where does this message, this idea of loving our enemies, take us? Now, here's a better UU question. Where should we take it? Well, I'm the one with the microphone, so I'm going to decide where we're going. And I'm going to take us down the path of three interwoven questions. Who, why, how? Who are our enemies? If they're our enemies, why should we love them? And if we really should love them, how in the name of all we hold holy are we going to do that? Who are our enemies? Who was Jesus talking about? Who was the Buddha talking about when he said that we should radiate love to all beings? Are we talking about Russia? Okay, I can love them. They're far away. That's not a problem. China? Comcast, when my internet doesn't work? I think it's more personal than that. Because those are easy. Well, maybe not Comcast. Luke's gospel gives us a pretty good start on who Jesus, at least, meant when he told us to love our enemies. Those who hate you, those who curse you, those who mistreat you. I mean, that seems to tell me that when he said enemies, Jesus kind of meant enemies. He was talking about people who cause us harm, not just people we find irritating. I would like to point out he never had a Comcast account. He's talking about a bunch of white boys in a township in South Africa in apartheid era. Now this gets in a little bit into the question of why, so I'm jumping ahead, but I wrote it, I get to. I don't think enemies here just means the people who have done bad things but are trying to change or to make amends. Like the red-haired boy who finally shared a little piece of candy with Desmond Tutu. Maybe that will happen. That would be great. It does happen. But Jesus charged his followers to love their enemies, expecting nothing in return. It isn't transactional. To try to model themselves on a God who himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. In the Matthew version, it ends with, "Be perfect as your God is perfect." That, frankly, is asking a lot. But as the Benedictine monk, Brother David Steindl-Rast put it, to love our enemies does not mean that we suddenly become their friends. If it is our enemies we are to love, they must remain enemies. And Steindl-Rast says we should have enemies because we should have convictions. And by having convictions, he wrote, we make ourselves the enemy of those who oppose our convictions. Well, now there is an answer to our question. Who is the enemy? We can identify them by knowing what do we value and who opposes our efforts to give life and meaning to those values. Now, those people, I can picture. All of us can. Take a minute. We got them. I got them. My blood pressure's going up just thinking about a few of them. Now hold on. That picture you have of those enemies, how many dimensions does it have? Those people in your picture, are any of them people you know well? Do any of them also happen to hold some values that you hold dear? Because this enemy thing, it's complicated. We need look no further than our own faith to see just how messy naming our enemies can get. In his 2022 Berry Street lecture, the Reverend Michael Slack recounts a day not long ago, and I want to emphasize that, when someone called and asked to talk to him in a pastoral setting, needed to sit down with him, to talk about a town hall meeting she had been at, a UU meeting, to talk about the eighth principle. The eighth principle, for those of you who don't know, calls us, if we were to adopt it, to embrace multiculturalism and to actively work against racism and oppression as part of our faith calling. At the meeting, Reverend Slack told his audience, a well-respected, retired UU minister actually suggested that the eighth principle wasn't necessary because black people did not have the intellectual capacity to actually be UU. I see the look on your face, Kendra. Or this, from a white male, UU appalled and defensive about the efforts to address white supremacy and privilege within our faith. This is from the Widening the Circle of Concern report. And he wrote in, another troubling idea being pushed by the commission is cultural misappropriation. Within our congregation, we've happily celebrated Day of the Dead and Juneteenth. And we regularly sing African American spirituals despite having no black members in our choir. Parenthetically, though I should add we have 2 black people in our congregation. These should be seen as great strides toward learning and reconciliation, this man wrote, not demonized and barred by illiberal fascist edicts from the UUA. Beloveds, these are our beloveds. They are fellow Unitarian Universalists. People who share many of my values, though clearly not all of them. So now, in that mental picture of enemies, because I know a little bit more about them, because they share some connection to a faith that means so much to me, I can't limit them to that flat, single dimension. And that brings us to our second question. Why should we listen to Jesus and love our enemies? Well, because living with people is messy, and we don't have a heck of a lot of choice. And as philosopher Martha Nussbaum observed, it is a form of human love to accept our complicated, messy humanity and not run away from it. And hate, righteous indignation, or even condescending dismissal, which is the one I am often the most guilty of. Those are easy ways to run away from the messiness of being human together. I mean, they let us rest in the idea of our own moral superiority, which Unitarians have been accused of more than once. Mock the enemy, ignore the enemy, that'll show them. And that, as a kind priest told a young Desmond Tutu, is the problem. You will get them back, and then they will get you back, and soon our whole world will be filled with nothing but getting back. Why love our enemies? Because somebody has to break that cycle. Or maybe we don't get them back. Maybe when the enemy is one of our own, the easy road we choose is just silence. So we can sidestep the discomfort, not make a scene. Play it safe. That, though, is not what a universalist love asks of us. Love for us, wrote the Reverend Rebecca Parker, is dangerous. It surprises, disrupts, alters the status quo. And the status quo could use an update. So how do we do that? Well, to answer that last question, I think we need to think first about what love is in this message and what it isn't. Because the love we are talking about this morning should not be understood as some sort of, not even casual, but self-sacrifice. That kind of love, Rebecca Parker wrote, sometimes labors hard to protect perpetrators of sin from their obligations and responsibilities, carrying their burdens for them, protecting them from paying the cost of those choices. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, UU theologian James Luther Adams warned us time and again against liberal religion losing track of the reality of sin in this world. Love cannot be everybody's okay. It cannot ignore the acts of evil and harm in this world. It cannot enable them, because down that path is what the Buddhists call idiot compassion. Buddhists aren't always nice. So yeah, idiot compassion's a little harsh, sure. But what they're getting at is that to be meaningful, compassion can't be some sort of gooey, let's all be nice to each other and hug it out, kumbaya sort of love. Jesus, after all, didn't say, feel nice things about your enemies or feel good about them. He said, do good. What we need is the fierce-faced bodhisattva, a compassion that knows love is not always nice or sweet or gentle, that love sometimes must be direct, blunt, even forceful, but always guided by compassionate intention. Intention alone isn't enough, but it is absolutely necessary. And that kind of love is at the heart of a developing and growing universalist theology. It was the charge to the Article 2 Commission to make love the center of our faith. It is a love that says, in the words I hope soon are adopted in Article 2 as the value statement of our faith, it is a love that says we are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Accountable. Loving our enemy means holding them accountable when they cause harm and letting them hold us accountable for the hurts we cause. And we will hurt. Anything else, failing to hold people accountable, to respect them enough to believe they can and should be accountable, that they can and should be better human beings, is not honoring the fullness of their humanity or ours. Excusing them, keeping quiet, ignores their inherent worth and dignity. And it perpetuates the harm they are causing, disregarding the worth and dignity of the people they hurt. And remember Reverend Slack's account of the UU minister who said black people aren't smart enough to be UUs? Of course you do. I've been carrying it around for weeks. After he shared that story, he paused for a moment, and then he told his audience, I don't actually want us to just take that in, like we sometimes invite one another to do. What I want is for us to rip open the comfort of civility and wail and scream about that mess. Except he said it so much more calmly, and I don't know how. How do we express an accountable love? How? A couple of weeks ago, Reverend Diana showed us one way, something she learned from kids. Ouch. Oops. Own the impact. When somebody causes harm, ouch. Tell them. Don't let it slide. Give them the chance to see what they did and apologize and to make it better. Now, I know it's a cute little saying. It sounds super cutesy. But Reverend Slack's message, that wasn't cute. That was angry, righteous love. It was raw. For people to be told sincerely, honestly, unflinchingly that they have caused harm, that is hard to ignore. And every time the message is repeated, it gets a little harder to ignore. That is love. Now, I am not saying it is impossible to ignore. Whether the person who causes that harm, and remember, that person could be us. Whether they say oops, whether they own the harm, try to make it better. In the end, that's up to them. Love cannot make them receive the message. But it can make damn sure the message gets delivered. So if we listen, if we give it voice, love is loud. Blessed be. May we make it so.